I'm Ilyan Saint-Hilaire, and in this video we're going to take a look at MeshCentral's authentication log, invalid login policy, and password policy. In order to keep MeshCentral secure, you're going to have your users and yourself log into MeshCentral using some kind of credentials, usually a username and password. And if you use a username and password, there is some strict controls over what happens if somebody tries a invalid password over and over again. You want to be able to log those invalid attempts. You want to be able to block too many attempts at a given time from a given IP address. And you also want to be a little bit more selective in what passwords people can use. And so in this video, we're going to take a look at those three topics quite quickly. So first of all, I'm going to go and start with my trusty demo. I have my MeshCentral server here running on the left from the command line, and I have the web page open on the right. Okay, so the first thing to do is that I'm going to log out of it, and I want to log back in here, but I'm going to purposefully use valid and sometimes invalid username and passwords. And the first thing we want to do is we want to log these invalid attempts. Now, they are logged inside the MeshCentral database, and so if you log in as, I'm going to log in correctly here, admin, I can go into my account and I can say view previous logins, and you can see the previous login I have here. You can also go into my events report, generate a report for user logins in the last 30 days, and it will tell you when there's successful and unsuccessful attempts. So that's one way to do it. But if you're going to use different tools to monitor what's going on with MeshCentral, you'll need a different log, one that's not inside the database. So there is a auth log or authentication log in MeshCentral that you can use. So what I'm going to do is go to the settings section of my config.json, and I'm going to try the first setting here that I want to demonstrate, which is auth log, and then you put a path to a log file that you want MeshCentral to create. Now, this is just a text file, and it will log a whole bunch of information about what users are logging, failed attempts, correct attempts, and also two-factor authentication. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to restart my server, and as soon as I restart the server, if I go into my temp folder, I'm going to do that here. So I'm going to go in the temp folder, and you'll see right away a auth.log file. So I didn't even need to log in even once, that it's already created. And it just tells you that the server is now listening on these ports. So that's all. So there's nobody actually logged in yet, but it's kind of useful to know when the server started up for the purposes of looking at the log. Okay, so now I'm going to log out. I'm going to try an invalid username and password. And of course, there's a delay here on purpose. MeshCentral is purposefully delaying the response, and it says login failed. If I look at the log again, you will see that failed password for the username from this IP address and the port. So this is interesting because you can use tools like fail to ban to look at this log in real time and see if there are failure attempts and from what IP address, and maybe use blocking or other countermeasures when you see this. Okay, so now I'm going to log in correctly. And when I log correctly, you look at the log and it says accepted password for admin this IP address. Okay, so that's the auth log. Super important for your own monitoring. Of course, the events are still in the database, so you'll see it like invalid attempt here or login. They're still stored in a database, but super useful to have it as a separate file. It can be parsed by scripts and stuff like that when this file changes. So useful. Okay, so that's number one. Number two thing I want to show is the maximum login attempts. So let's suppose a bot goes and starts, trying to enter username and passwords here very quickly to try to guess a username and password to log into your server. Now, by default, there's a policy, and the policy is, I'm going to actually write it out here. The policy is that there is a maximum of 10 attempts within 10 minutes. So by default, if you don't write anything inside the config.json, MeshCentral will accept up to 10 attempts from a given IP address within 10 minutes. And after that, it will start blocking, like if it's more than that, it will start blocking all the attempts no matter what. Okay, so I can try that. And if I try lots of username and passwords here, it will fail. I'm going to log in correctly, and I'm going to show you guys how MeshCentral tracks the passwords. You can go to My Server Console, you can type help, and there's something called bad logins. It's a command here. So you're going to run that, and it says what the policy is. Max 10 bad logins in 10 minutes, and you can see this IP address. And actually, MeshCentral uses the IP address ignoring the last digit. So anything that's inside that subnet counts. So if you vary your IP address within the same subnet, it still counts as the same IP address. And then you have 2 records. That means there's 2 bad attempts here. So if you were to continue and this were to go up to 10, then MeshCentral will start blocking all attempts, even if it's the correct password. Okay, so you can use this bad logins command in the server console to track the current state of the bad logins. But you can override this policy if you want. So if you have a corporate policy that says you need to adjust this, then you can go and in config.json, you add max invalid logins, and you put the time and the count. So for example, I can say 5 and 5 here, or let's try 3 attempts in 5 minutes. So I can run that again. And then I won't try actually to do 3 attempts in 5 minutes, but if I go into the console here, type bad logins, you'll see max 5 bad logins in 3 minutes. So I can try it, and then it will start denying. Okay, so that's interesting. The other thing I want to mention is that you can exclude one or more ranges of IP address from this policy. So let's suppose you have a trusted network and you don't want the policy, the bad attempt policy, to apply to a subnet or a range of IP addresses. You can do that. In that case, you add the exclude here, and then you put your subnet, and I think it's comma separated list of IP addresses or IP address subnets here. So I don't really recommend anybody does that, and the reason is that if a hacker is able to proxy or something within your trusted network, then he gets to, or she gets to try to do as many attempts as possible, which is not good. And the last thing I want to look at is, for at least for this section, is the cool-off time. So say that you've hit, in this case, 3 times within 5 minutes. 5 times within 3 minutes. So you've hit that threshold. Now MeshCentral is going to start blocking. Well, at that point, the cool-off time is how many minutes does MeshCentral not allow any new attempts. So here, this would be 60 minutes. So if you don't mention this, if you don't specify the cool-off time, then it's 5 attempts within 3 minutes. But as soon as the oldest attempt is more than 3 minutes away, then you get to do a new attempt. So the window kind of moves forward, and as long as you have less than 3 attempts in the last 5 minutes, then you can try a new attempt. But if you put the cool-off time, if you enable this feature, then you will, then as soon as you reach this number where you can't try anymore, then you'll have to wait, in this case, 60 minutes before you can try again. Okay, so hopefully that was clear. In fact, I have a few slides, and I'm going to show the slides here on the different policies, and hopefully that will be clear. So if you have a policy that says maximum of 5 bad logins in 5 minutes, well, this is time here. This is and every little block here is a minute. So you have a bad login, and as soon as you have a bad login, it kind of starts a window. So you have a 5-minute window where you can have another bad login, and here there's 4 bad logins within that 5-minute window, and then the 5th invalid login is still approved. It's still an invalid, it's still a invalid login attempt, but because it's outside this 5-minute window, then it's still not blocked by the policy. So this would be what happens. Now, if this attempt was to happen earlier, then this would this would cause any further attempt afterwards to be blocked. So here, there's 5 attempts within 5 minutes. The next one right here, this one would be blocked even if you had the right password. Okay, so that's how that works. Now as soon as basically what you can do is every time you try, there's a password attempt, you can think about it as looking backwards 5 minutes to see how many there are. And if there's 5 or less, then the attempt is checked. Otherwise, it's blocked automatically. Okay, so that makes sense. And then this is an example of where the block policy would apply. You have 5 bad logins within 5 minutes. That's a policy we set. And so here you have 5 bad logins. Then the 6th one, because it's within the 5-minute barrier or timeline, then this one is automatically rejected no matter what the password is. And then the cool-off period, here I have a maximum of 5 bad logins within 5 minutes and a cooldown of 2 minutes. So what happens is you have 5 bad attempts. This one fails, and it fails and triggers the cooldown period. And so now you have another attempt, but this attempt is inside the cooldown period, so it's also rejected. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. One thing I do want to mention is that the cooldown period may not be as useful as you think. Some people are like, oh, this is great, I'm going to put a large cooldown period. If there's lots of bad attempts from a given IP address, then having a large cooldown period will make it so that the attacker really can't try for example, an hour or something. And I just want to mention that if you have a basic policy of 5 bad logins in 5 minutes, the maximum amounts of attempts that can be made against a given account is 5 attempts per 5 minutes. But if you have a cooldown period set, then really what you want is you don't want to start triggering that 5 minutes. So that cooldown period. So you would still have 5 attempts every 5 minutes, but the 6th attempt would cause the cooldown period to start. So the attacker would probably, if they were smart, would attempt just, would retry just underneath the amount that triggers the cooldown period. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so that's the That's the policy here. And then the other thing I want to mention is, oh yes, the password requirements. So we've looked at the logging, we've looked at the maximum amounts of retries. Now, one thing I want to mention is your users may start using bad passwords or passwords that are really common. And so there's a few things you may want to adjust. And this is in the domain section of the config.json. There's a section called password requirements. And you can set the minimum and maximum length of a password, number of uppercase, number of lowercase, number of numeric and non-alphanumeric characters. So you can say, I want to require an uppercase, a lowercase, one numeric, and one non-alphanumeric character. Or you can even say, require two uppercase or whatever. So by default, these are the upper, lower, numeric, and non-alpha. Those are all zeros. And then the minimum and maximum, I think there's no set value here. So you may want to kind of adjust that depending on your corporate policy. Another one of these settings that's interesting, and by default this is not enabled, is the old password ban. And by default it's set to 10. And what that does is it says if a user resets their password to a new password, don't allow the new password to be the same as one of the 10 last password that user had on the account. So this avoids users kind of switching from password 1 to password 2, back to password 1, then back to password 2. If users switch passwords, they have to create new passwords, like up to 10 new passwords before they can, or 11 new passwords in this case, before they can reuse the old one. So that's an interesting thing. Reset here, this is the number of days before a user has to reset their password. So if some corporate policies will be like every 30 days or every quarter or every year, a user has to reset their password. And so you set the number of days here, and when that time has elapsed, the user will be prompted to enter a new password. Okay, and then lastly, there's this ban common passwords. This basically has a list of 10,000 passwords, and actually it's called the LiQWYD package. So I'll pull it up real quick here on the browser. So it's called LiQWYD, and it's a package that has 10,000 of the top used passwords. And you can click on this link here, and it actually gives you the list. So monkey, football, dragon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and QWERTY, the word password, and so on. So this is just a list of really, really bad passwords that you really don't want your users to pick. And so if you put this option and you set it to true, then the LiQWYD package is installed with MeshCentral. And then every time a user types in a password, the password is checked against this list before it's approved as a password you can set. So that is interesting. Now note that if you're using like one upper, one lower, if you're using any of these requirements, you probably don't need this because pretty much all of these passwords are all lowercase. So if you mandate a uppercase, there's some uppercases like Charles with a C here. But if you mandate like an uppercase and a numeric, then I don't think many of these passwords will match. So in that case, you would be fine. So yeah, but if you're not going to mandate upper, and lower or numeric, if you're not going to mandate these things, or if you're going to mandate like the minimum password be fairly long, then you don't need this. But otherwise, probably a good idea to enable it so that your users don't pick silly passwords. Okay, so hopefully that was good. Basically, In today's video, I wanted to cover the logging. I wanted to cover the way we can block bots from attempting lots and lots of different password attempts on the MeshCentral server, and also the password requirements, maybe setting these settings correctly for your corporate or your policy. Anyway, hopefully that was useful. Thank you very much. Have a great day.